Great to be with you. Thanks for coming out tonight and spending some time with us. Really look forward to the discussion with you tonight. A couple of really good topics that I think are just super important as we think about, just management strategies to just more efficiently manage our herds. And I think for me in particular, cow-calf specialist, that's what I focus in, cow-calf nutrition management, applied reproduction. When Charlene asked for this topic, talking about body condition scoring and tied it in with some important fundamentals for this time of year, I think it's spot on. This is one of my favorite topics that I like to talk to producers about, and that I think is just super important when we think about managing our cow herds strategically and economically as we go forward, especially in this environment now where calf prices are really, really good, but female prices are strong. And I think we'll continue to be that way. And as we think about going forward here for our upcoming calving seasons, these live calves are going to be worth a lot of money for us, right? And so I think we got to be always thinking about that in the back of our mind. How many of you, just as we kind of get going here, are you mostly spring calvers, fall calvers that you interact with or that you manage, or maybe a little bit of both? Fall? A little both, spring. Okay, so we got a little bit of a mix, and that's good. And the reason I asked that question, so I would say be thinking about the concepts that we'll talk about tonight. The timeline and sequence and everything, of course, will obviously vary depending on when you calve, but it's important no matter what, right? Depending on regardless of what your specific calving window is within the year, these concepts and fundamentals apply. Okay. So I want to start off here, not to get everybody nervous. It's like, oh man, we got to talk about economics now. It's not what I came here for, right? No. I think this is really, really important because it kind of sets the tone for why body condition score is so darn important in these cows, right? I'm sure you've seen this before, this unit cost of production concept or idea, right? You can have a unit cost of production for anything that you produce, regardless of what your industry is, right? But for us on the cow-calf side of things, it's that cost to produce a pound of a weaned calf, and you can look at it through the yearling phase if you keep those calves back and grow them, right? There's different ways that you can look at that. But most commonly, we just look at it, what's our cost to get a pound of a calf all the way out to weaning, right? That weaning phase, we're going to sell that calf, right? If you take your total annual cow costs, just the total cost that you would have wrapped up in that cow herd, per cow per year, and if you divide it out by the level of pounds of calf wean per cow exposed that you see, that will give us a really good number, a unit cost of production number. That's our break even, essentially, if we were going to take those calves and sell them, right? And the revenue that we get from that situation pays for all those cows that didn't produce a calf, right? Because it's per cow exposed, right? On a per cow exposed basis. So it counts for those losses that we have there. I just point this out here that, okay, if those are the numbers, if our pounds weaned per cow exposed is 520 out of an annual cow cost of $1,000, and most of our benchmark industry data would say we're getting probably pretty close to that in most situations now. So basically $2 a pound, right, is our break even. What are 520 weight calves bringing right now, right? Somewhere well north of that. Point is we got good strong margins in the industry right now, but let's take advantage of that and get as many calves weaned as we can, and it starts with nutrition on the cow herd side of things, and that has a myriad of implications as we think about just managing the herd going forward, right? So as I think about the use of the body condition score system and why it's so important, it really goes back to that fundamental concept there that nutrition is closely tied to reproduction in a cow herd. And really when you step back and you take a look at it, that's a really, really important aspect for us. Feed represents 60 to 70% of our total annual cow costs. And we know that how we manage our feed program has direct implications for what level of reproduction we see out of that cow herd, regardless of how you measure reproduction. If it's conception rates or calves that you get at weaning, there's different metrics you can put around it, but something to keep in mind there. Really, the focus needs to be, I think, primarily on pre-calving nutrition. Post-calving nutrition has an implication too, but as we think about strategic supplementation decisions and those types of things, the focus really is on that cow pre-calving because that's when it really matters. Body conditions, a better assessment for us. nutritionally than for where those cows are than weight in and of itself, right? And sometimes I think it's kind of easy to read a lot into weight. And but when we think about, okay, trying to gauge where that cow herd is nutritionally, and do we need to maybe change some things with what we're doing, and trying to make good judgment calls there, body conditions are best indicator there, right? And again, going back to the unit cost of production idea, those two things tie together, right? So that's the key there. This is some data from a project that was done out in Wyoming a few years ago, but I think it really does a nice job of showing the implication that poor body condition at the time of calving can have in a set of cows. And there would be data sets from around the country that would be real similar to this, but this is a really nice example that I like to show. So what we're looking at here are two different groups of cows that were a body condition score 4 or a 6 at the start of the calving season, and the implications there that we have on performance. And you can see those cows that calved at a condition score 4, and this was first calf females, calved at a condition score 4, they're lighter. You can see the body condition score there. What did it really impact? As you really primarily look at it, no difference there in milk production, calf weights, or calf performance out till weaning. But it really hurt us from a reproduction standpoint, right? First service conception rates there quite a bit different in that trial. And then when you look at overall pregnancy rates there with that group of females, quite a bit lower for those females that were thinner at the start of the calving season. And again, there would be some other data sets that would really match this very nicely that have been conducted over the course of time. But I think as you think about it and you take a look at it, it's most likely the effects that we'll see if we've got a set of cows that aren't quite where we want them to be when we go to start that calving season may not necessarily show up in calf performance, milk production, those types of things, but most likely we'll see it later on down the road from a reproduction standpoint. And it won't always necessarily be the breed up in that year. It could just be when those females get bred. And so those are some things we want to keep in mind there as we look at it. This is some older data, but it's really, really good work that was done. And I like to show this because it really does a nice job of describing the impact or the change of condition score at calving on how quickly those females return to estrus after calving. All right. And so we're looking at postpartum interval here, or essentially that interval after calving until first estrus happens again. And that's really important, right? Because we want to make sure that we get those females bred to calve in a 365-day annual cycle, right? So the later that they are, the more delayed that interval to first estrus is, the longer that period is, delays when those females get bred. And so we want to try to keep that as short as we can so we have good active cycles, and those females are bred early on when they're first exposed, regardless of however that's done, right? So as you look at it, what we're looking at here across the horizontal side of this is body condition score at calving. So as we can see, as we advance those females from a 3 to a 4 to 5 to a 6, we see a really nice drop there in postpartum interval getting shorter, which is good. Those females are resuming to estrus a lot quicker. What the other thing too that this chart shows us is, so what those lines represent are levels of energy that were fed in this trial after calving. And so when we look at females that were fed a low level of energy after calving, that post-calving early lactation time period, that postpartum interval was still delayed for those females that were restricted after that time period, right? But what this also shows us is that between those females that were fed either an adequate level of nutrition, basically set up to maintain the level of body condition that they had, or if they were really fed a high level of energy after calving, really didn't see a lot of difference there in that trial. And there would be some other data that would be similar to this. Really didn't make a lot of difference there from a postpartum interval standpoint, or how quickly those females came back into estrus after calving. So what that tells us is that it's primarily a function of where they are at the start of the calving season. But if those females are thin, trying to feed a high level of energy post-calving to try to play catch up with it is really not beneficial. It really doesn't do us a whole lot of good there from that standpoint. And that's essentially what these data will suggest to us. So think it really does a really nice job of describing that for us. So from an economic standpoint, this is to me where I think we always want to be cognizant of the change that we might want to put on a set of cows, and the timeline that we might want to do it, and economically, how does that impact our operation from a feed cost standpoint? So if you take a cow, this is an example. If you've got a 1,350-pound cow, and I'm looking at the last 2 months prior to calving, okay? So regardless of when she calves, just those last 2 months during that time period, if we're gonna maintain her at a body condition score 5, that's where she is, and we're just gonna maintain her during that time period. If she's out there eating a full diet of native range, we've got her out on pasture, just an average quality winter pasture that we would see for this time of year, going into fall and winter, plus a little bit of dry distillers, we can maintain that female pretty well from a condition score standpoint. These are kind of, I put these numbers together back earlier this spring. I know feed prices have changed a little bit. So what I want you to focus on, though, is the relative difference there between these scenarios, okay? Pretty economical, and I'm just looking at the cost of distillers to maintain that female during that time period. But if all of a sudden those females are thinner than that, if we got to change them from a 4 to a 5, or in this case, from a 3 to a 5, and we're going to do it in 2 months, 60 days, and we're going to try to change her that quickly, that really adds a lot of cost to the system in order for us to be able to do that. And you can make that difference up, with whatever you want to use there. You can see what I've got plugged in for an example for just some feed resources, just some basic feed resources. The key, though, is the takeaway that I want you to remember is that if we're going to change those females really quickly, it's a whole lot more costly for us to be able to do that, okay? And so what we want to avoid is getting into those situations where, it's cows are going to start calving February 1. We're looking at them like January 10th or January 5th or something like that, and we're thinking, oh man, these girls aren't quite where we want them to be. What do we need to be doing different? Well, especially if Mother Nature starts to work against us in the case of the spring calving female, right? Or other reasons that that time of year, just trying to play catch up and really change those cows quickly can be difficult and much more costly from that standpoint. Okay. So what are we ultimately evaluating when we think about body condition, right? We're trying to understand, identify what level of fat that those females have relative to the amount of muscle tissue that they have. And we're just trying to use our best estimate of the visual indicators that we see in that cow herd to put our best estimate of, thanks, Charlene, yeah, that's good, to understand where those females are physiologically and being able to make a good management decision with where she is, right? So we're looking at those key indicators on those females, but ultimately, when you hear and you read material about body condition, it's essentially looking at overall carcass composition in these females is what we're talking about and what we're looking at there with them, trying to get our best estimate of where those females are from a fat thickness standpoint. Okay. These numbers that I have here in this table, so beef cattle system, right? We're 1 to 9. The dairy system, sometimes you might see some information out there or hear information about the dairy system. They use a 1 to 5 system. Beef cattle, it's 1 to 9. It's been around for a while, and a lot of good research over the course of time that was done at various universities. Some of our ag research station experiment stations conducted some of the research that was done and that was ultimately put together to come up with the uniform system that everybody across the industry has agreed upon. I just want you to see just the range here in carcass fat that we can see with these females from a 1 or a 2 all the way out to a cow that's really, really obese, right? That's a 9, right? Just the range that we can see there. And they did this through a technique. It was called serial slaughter. They took cows, fed them to different weights and different compositions, harvested them, and then measured out how much fat, how much protein, or how much muscle tissue, and how much bone there was in the carcass, and they weighed it all out. And that's how they came up with these numbers, right? The important thing that I want you to keep in mind here is that, generally speaking, for cows that are in production for us, every change in condition score is about 75 to 85 pounds. It's not perfect, but we'll get pretty close to that on average. in most situations. Quick and easy, right, and a really effective system. Anybody, regardless of what their experience level with beef cattle is, can learn this system, and everybody can use it the same way, right? How many of you have ultrasound machines? Carcass ultrasound machines, right? There's not very many producers that do. There's a very select group of people out there that will, they're skilled in ultrasound, right, and they can do that, right? Really important tool for us. Not practical at all, right? From the standpoint of being able to use it quickly, make good strategic decisions, manage our cow herds well, right? It's far and away the most effective tool that we have to really make good assessments for how we need to manage these cows. And and quick, simple, easy system. Is it perfect every time? No. Can we maybe be off a little bit and maybe a little bit of discrepancy there from one person to the next because it's a subjective system? Absolutely, right? So if you and I are maybe off by a score, or maybe you two are off by a score, that's okay, right? In the whole grand scheme of things, that's okay. Where we run into problems is if we're off by like 2 or more scores or 3 scores, then we probably need to come back and think about, okay, what are we seeing, and make sure that we're thinking about things the same line, right? So big picture here, I just want to point out, generally speaking, 3 to 7 is where I see a lot of cows anywhere from that 3 to 7 range. Not very often that I'll see cows down here at 2 or less. If we're talking about, somebody's talking about a female that's in a condition score 1, talking about an animal that's in a starvation situation and very weak, can't get up, right? If that animal's in a starvation situation, but it can get up and it can reach feed, it can reach water, okay, that's a 2. That's the judgment that we use there in that situation. Obviously, we don't want to put animals in that situation. Very rarely do we ever see that. Not very often that I see 8s and 9s. We can get them out there to that level though. But see a lot of 6s and 7s in a lot of situations. But we can see that variation within the herd, right? Key things that I want you to think about with the system. Consider it as an important piece of your record keeping program, and I would encourage you to do that. Do any of you? How many of you do you typically record condition scores on your herd, or on whether it's on a herd basis or on an individual basis, and then go back and look at it later on? It'd be something I'd encourage you to think about. I think there's a lot of value in that. And one thing I've noticed over the course of time, I think for all of us, sometimes it's harder to see the subtle changes in those cows when you're around them all the time, right? But if you can make a good gauge of where they are, a good estimate of where those females are, condition score wise, make a note of it. And then you get 2-3 months down the road, right? And you're going back and you're looking at them. If you've got a record of it somewhere, it's a whole lot easier to reference back to where they were and say, okay, what have we been doing the last 2-3 months, or what have our conditions been like? And now what's the change that we've seen? And so I encourage you to keep that in mind. This is just a nice record book that we have at K-State that does a nice job of using a tally system. I'm going to show it to you here in just a second. Obviously, everybody's got a different system for doing records, right? And the information is a little bit different to everybody, right? As far as what's valuable to you and what's not valuable to you. I do think this is a good record to have. As I think about it, okay, last 90 days prior to calving is a good time to get a good read on where those females are. Last 60 days, if you're not going to do it 3 months prior to calving, the last 60 days is good. We talked about that. The ramifications of getting closer to calving and trying to change them closer to calving is a little bit more difficult. But then, of course, understanding where those females are at the start of the calving season. And then, of course, as we think about the start of the breeding season, regardless of whether that's natural service or if you're syncing them up to breed them, AI, or however you do that. And then, of course, getting a good read on them when you pull the calves off, I think is a really good strategy there. So generally speaking, those are the 4 times that I would look at there. First one there is most important from that standpoint. This is just a quick snapshot for you of what that record book looks like. And this is just a way that you could do a nice job of tracking where the overall herd is without doing individual scores on animals. So this is just called the tally method. And so this is just a picture of what that sheet would look like inside that record book. So just tally up the number of females that you see at one time within each one of those scores. And if you take those scores, multiply them out by the number of head that you have, then divide it out by the total number of cows that you have within that group, you can get an average for the group, right? So if you've got 15 in this situation that were 5 in this situation that were 3 or less, 40 that were a 4, 35 that were a 5, so on and so forth. Just multiply it out, multiply the number of head that you get by the score that you're in, add it all up, divide it out by the number of cows that you have within that group. That gives you an average of the overall group. You don't have to worry about recording scores for each individual animal and tracking it that way. It's just a summation of where the entire group is. Really effective way to do it. I encourage you to keep that in mind as you're thinking about it. There's different ways that you can go about it, but that's a nice tool for you. And again, a place where you can record it over the course of time. All right. Again, some of the key areas that I really want you to focus on when you're thinking about reading these cows, right? So any place where fat's going to be stored, right? So that animal puts excess energy on and she stores it as fat tissue. It's going to be stored wherever, it's out of the way of the major muscles and the areas of that animal that are really important for locomotion. So, she's going to put it on down here in the brisket area, right behind her shoulder. You look at her from her shoulder back into her hooks and her pins across her top line, her 12th and 13th rib. Those are really important areas to look at on a cow. And of course, right around her tail head. I point this out to just keep in mind that, those areas are the really important areas that you want to look at, because you don't want to try to get those areas confused with fill, hair score, those types of things that can influence how we judge those cows. But so those are the really, really important areas that I really want you to focus on as you're thinking about looking at them. Okay. Got some breed differences here. So a little bit of type and kind differences. I've given you the weights on these cows, the days when we took the pictures of them. Okay. So as you look at them, just curious kind of what you all think as you look at those cows. Are they closer together or are they farther apart from a condition score standpoint when you look at them? Okay, you think they're pretty close? Yeah. Okay, yeah, yeah, good. Yeah, why do you think that? Yep, looking at her up here.
Easier to see on it.
Yeah, yeah, yep. You bring up a great point. Yeah, it's being able to see sometimes through shadows makes a difference for sure on them. So this Simmental cow on the left, and I show this example because I just think it does a nice job of just the things that we see every day, right? Simmental cow here on the left, right? She's got more frame to her. She's longer bodied, more extended. This Hereford cow over here on the right, she's got a little more shape and spring rib. I think she's a little bit more moderate in her kind, right? I would agree with you. I think they're a lot closer to each other than what they are different. As I read them, I have them at the exact same condition score between the two, right? I call them the same from a body condition standpoint. This Hereford cow is carrying just a little bit more down into her brisket area, but as you look at them, they're real similar, right behind their shoulder and then coming across their top line. I think those cows are a lot more similar condition score wise than what they are different. So I agree with you. I think you're spot on there. And sometimes the weight can be helpful. Sometimes the weight can throw you off just a little bit, right? But I think the most important thing is when you're thinking about them, just try to put out of your mind, okay, what you think her weight is, and you just focus on her for what she is and read her for those true indicators, right? That's the thing you got to keep in mind there. So, and going back to the thought on hair and fill, and especially this time of year, as those cows are putting hair on, right, as winter comes on, is really important, right? Same cow here in this picture, in both these pictures, same female, just about 2 weeks apart. Really difference there from a shedding off standpoint, right? Right, we're getting a little bit closer into summertime, and she's really starting to slick off there. And just being able to just read through that and account for that is really, really important. Okay, so same female here as I had just in that last slide. I've given you the date on her. Keep that in mind as you go. And I just want you to just study her for a little bit and just think about those things that we've been talking about. And I think it's really helpful to look at them on a 3/4 angle, just be able to get that good angle and not be straight on them right off their side. To be able to look at them from that standpoint, I think is really, really important. But I got to look at them on the move. I think for me, that's always the most beneficial if I can look at those cows when they're walking by me, right? Either coming out of the chute or walking by the gate post, right? Or coming up to you when you're caking them, right? However you do it, right? That's the key thing there. You want to see her again? I'll show her again here. Looking at those key indicators right there, right? Thinking about from where she is from her shoulder back into her rib cage. I've got her at a 3. I think she's a body condition score 3. I think she's a really nice example of a condition score 3 cow. She's a cow that, especially when you look at her on that 3/4 angle, you can see a lot of rib there on her, right? Her ribs are very, very prominent. The hair on her in this picture, right? She's carrying a little bit more, but she's real thin and hard right behind her shoulder. You can see her spinous processes. She's not an old cow, right? She's 3-year-old in this picture. But she's pretty thin there from her hooks back into her pins. She's one that I think too, when you look at her, there's some muscle loss in that female, right? She's not to the point where she's really starting to lose a lot of muscle. You look at her down into her stifle, she's still got some shape there, but she's a little bit thinner, I think, than what we would like, right? But I've got her at a 3. I think she's a really, really nice example of a 3. Okay. Here she is, a little over a month and a half later. Okay. And I've given you her weight there so you can see the change over the course of time. What's the biggest thing you notice about her? Really slicked off, right? Yeah, really slicked off nice. Yeah, really starting to fill in nice here from her shoulder back into her rib. She's starting to fill in there across her top line, starting to get a little bit smoother, carrying a little bit more. See what she looks like on the move for you. She's starting to fill out that down there in her brisket area. She's not getting real full down there, but she's definitely starting to put it on a little bit more. I think there, about 45 days later, that's a really good example of a cow that's in a BCS4. Okay, and notice how much fuller she is right here from her shoulder back into her forerib. She's still pretty sharp. You can see her hooks and her pins real prominent, but it's not as thin as where she was previously, right? Okay, here she is, a little over a month later, mid-August. Okay. There's a front view of her. You can see how she's, again, from the previous month, really starting to change and smooth out there nicely. Notice you can still see her ribs, right? You still see 12th and 13th rib on her, but she's certainly filling in and smoothing up quite a bit, right? Really good example of a 5 here, right? About a month later. So we've had her on feed now for several months. But when she gets into this image here, I think that's a really nice example of a cow that's in a BCS 5, right? Just a really, really good example of that. See how smooth she is from her shoulder back across her rib cage. She's still fairly prominent here, but certainly starting to fill in better and putting more condition up around her tailhead than what she was a month prior to that. Like a really nice example of a 5. Here, month down the road, so we fed her another month. Okay, got her out here to mid-September. See how she's really starting to get much more. She's got that square, wider look to her top line, starting to put some more muscle shape back on. You can see right around here, around her hooks to her pins, she's still filling in a little bit more there than where she was. But just a female that when she gets to this point, you can see she's really starting to change. We'll put her in motion here. I just want you to look at her and kind of think about where she was back in July when she was a 4 to where she is today in this image, right? You know, you can still see some rib on her, but it's still not as prominent as what it was, but she's really starting to fill in a lot around her hip area. So I think great example of a 6 here in this picture, right? In this image. So you see where she is weight-wise, how we've been adding weight to her, but I think she's a great example there of a cow that's in a BCS 6. So 5s and 6s really where we need them to be. Ideally, we want cows to be in a 6 if they're first calvers at the start of the calving season. Mature cows at a 5. That's what the data would tell us from a reproduction standpoint is ideal there. Okay, here she is a month later. And I have this for you here just for reference because I just want you to see the change and think about the progression on that female, right? So middle of October, look at her here now, thinking back to where she was a month ago. Carrying a little bit more down there in her brisket. See how stout she is. I realize there's a little bit of a shadow here, but there it's you got the sun. We got the sun on her here, so it's a little bit easier to see. Much more rounded in her appearance, right? She's really filling in. You can't hardly see any rib on her in that situation. You can see her walking away from you there, right? She's really putting a lot of fat right around her tail head, right? Back into her pin bones, right? Great example of a 7. Like really nice example of a cow that's in a BCS 7, okay? Here she is a month later, middle of November. She's starting to hair up again. Notice how much fuller she is, you know, down into her brisket area, right? I mean, really starting to lay a lot of condition back on her. So based on where she is video-wise in these images that we have and where she is weight-wise, I'll show you the weight on her. You know, I think if you called her an 8 in that situation, I wouldn't disagree with you one bit. I think that would be certainly appropriate there. You can see, you know, how wide she is coming across her top line there. Important thing is here is, you know, from a reproduction standpoint, not a lot of difference there, body condition score 7 or 8, right? And if those cows put it on naturally that way, that's great. But we don't want to always necessarily have to feed them to the point where we've got them at that weight and at that condition score, right? So, you know, if you're off by, you know, a score there and there, that's again certainly appropriate, right? I just want to show this to you. We think about these cows with where we started them out at, okay? Less than 900 pounds down here at a condition score 3, brought them out here to over 1,400 pounds. I said 75 to 85 pounds on average. These cows were dry, open cows, but you know, we think about that 75 to 85 pound range would be more appropriate for those cows that are in lactation and breeding. But I think just nice example there of the changes you can see over the course of time. So that 75 to 85 rule, I think, is pretty appropriate for you, okay? Key points that I just want you to really focus on when you think about using the system and being really intentional with it. And that's the key for me, I think, is being intentional with the system, doing a good job of getting in the cows at the key times throughout the year, reading them for what they are, and being honest with yourself as to where they are and where we think they need to be, right? Just understanding, right, that it's a tool, it's an effective management tool. And in and of itself, I think at the ranch levels, one of the most effective tools we have to influence reproduction, influence feed costs, those types of things is really important. If you can sort these cows at certain times of the year, and I'm thinking about at weaning time, if you've got the ability to go a couple different directions with them, depending on how your management is set up, you can sort those cows, take cows that are 4s or less, and put those cows in a group, and cows that are 5s and above, and maybe do some strategic supplementation, right? Those are the kinds of things I think being able to do is what's valuable for us on the ranch, because if we've got a set of females that are in great shape and we don't need to start supplementing those females for maybe another 30 or 45 days, we can save on some supplement costs on them. And conversely, if we've got some females that are thinner for whatever reason, but we just need to put a little more nutrition and energy into those females to make sure we've got them where they need to be at calving, that can be a substantial driver there from a reproduction standpoint, right? Being a little bit more strategic there with where we put our feed dollar. Again, this time of year, just being real cognizant of where those females are fill-wise and hair-wise. It's, I think, really easy to misjudge those cows when they get a lot of winter hair coat on them, and being able to read through that is important. When you've got cows, if you've got females in the chute, fall preg check work or calving shots prior to the start of the calving season, doing those types of things, you can always put your hands on those cows and help confirm with your hands what your eyes are telling you, right? And sometimes that's valuable, and especially when they got a lot of hair on them. So don't be afraid to do that. And we've got some resources there that I'll show you that are nice to have chute side. You can use just as a quick gauge. Okay, where are these females at? Are they close to where I think that they are? Again, we talked about the importance of not getting in the situation where you're having to play catch up on them. This is a BCS scorecard that we have. We can get this for you through any of our offices, available with our printing system there on campus, but just a nice chute side reference for you there of what you're seeing. Okay, if I'm looking at these cows, are these things all lining up? Again, Trish trying to get the major things there, right? Making sure that, okay, are we consistently seeing these cows as 3s and 4s? Are we consistently seeing them as 5s and 6? Those types of things, being close with them, that's the most important thing there that we want to focus on. But a nice reference for you there. I encourage you to take a look at. A couple other good references for you that we have. This one on the left, that one that's called the Guide to Body Condition Scoring Cows and Bulls, just walks through a little bit more detail of some things that we've talked about, but a lot of the same fundamental principles. But it's just a really good resource for you. The other one over there on the right talks a little bit more about just nutritional strategies, has some examples of some supplementation programs and some rations that you might consider, those types of things to think about, how you need to manage them nutritionally if you've got cows in certain body condition score ranges and groups. Okay, so that's really the difference between those two, but a nice resource for you. See, a few of you grab the posters. We've got plenty of them. If you need them for your friends or your family, feel free to take them. They work really good on the wall of the tack room or on the vet shack. That's a great place for them, right? Great resource for you. So I encourage you to take those, and then that other one as well too. So there's the links there for them if you need those. Any of us can get those for you. So that's what we've got them. Got them available through our offices for you there. That's my contact information. I'm happy to visit with you at any time if there's ever anything that you have questions about or like some assistance with. That's what we do. So feel free to reach out if there's ever anything that I can be of assistance with. That's our extension website, so ksubeef.org. Just a really nice resource for you there that I encourage you to make note of. Got a lot of good resources there. There's links back to the things that I showed you there. Those resources that I mentioned in the slides, those are all available on that website. And we've got a lot of other information on there as well too. There's some calculators, spreadsheets, research reports, those types of things. So good resource for you there, and happy to visit with you at any time. But encourage you. I think the big thing that as I work with producers on, my experience has been, and I think about what we do on our operation, the herd that I manage for K-State, we're not always necessarily the best in the industry. I think about using the system to make good record keeping decisions and to be able to do good strategic management decisions with cows, strategic sorting, those types of things. And so I think that's really the big thing that I see with the system is putting it to use for us to help out in some of these areas. But far and away, most effective tool you've got to manage that cow herd nutritionally and get optimal nutrition into those females for optimal reproduction. That's what it's all about. So questions, comments, thoughts on anything before we visit about some things with regards to animal health products? Well, reach out if there's ever anything that I can help you out with. Got a lot of really good resources available at your fingertips. So yeah, Jeff.
technologies coming to assist in that body condition scoring or to replace it even?
It's a good question. Don't know that I've seen much with that. It wouldn't surprise me at some point down the road. We might, there might be some things where, with video imaging, some use of some higher level AI type technologies, artificial intelligence, not the AI that I think of when I think of AI. But those types of things, I haven't seen any of those yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if in a few years we might see something there with that. Yeah. Now there are some apps. There are some apps that are available, and maybe you've seen those or you've used those before. And those work pretty well for the most part. The resources that I really like what we've done with K-State that I think are super valuable is if you notice. Right, so we can get you these slides and those videos and everything available for you, right? That you can look at, but same cows, but the progression of the same female over the course of multiple body condition scores is not very widely available. My freeze brands weren't perfect on these. Got to work on that. So, but the same cow with the same type of background that you really get a good judgment of where that female is and how she's changing over the course of time. I've not seen that in any apps that are available. Now, some of those apps are helpful, certainly, but that's the one piece that I've not seen with that I think our materials that we have are super helpful with that. I'm working on some bull material. I think being able to get a good read on these bulls is really helpful as well too. They're just so much different, but they have so much more muscle mass. But the system applies with it as well too. And I would really encourage you as you think about managing bulls going into this time of year, because when we pull them out of cows, they can be easily the most forgotten animal on the place, right? It's easy to you turn them out, they're done, right? And it's easy to just kind of let them be, right? But especially on these young bulls, and just like on these young cows and bulls, they're going to grow out till about 4 to 5. They're pretty well done growing by 5, but they've got a requirement out till about 4 years of age. And what we don't want to do with these bulls is, if they run hard and we lose some body condition on those bulls because they're running hard, covering females, doing a good job for us. Obviously, that's what we want. We don't want them to get to the point where they get so thin, where they're burning a lot of muscle tissue and they're a 3. You're seeing a lot of real prominent spinous processes on those bulls. Their hooks and their pins are real prominent, because then that puts them at greater risk, I think, primarily for injury. And, when we're managing with older, mature bulls, just the risk of injury happening there just gets higher with that. And so I would encourage you to be thinking about, just be cognizant of that when you're thinking about managing these bulls too. You can still use the same type of system on it. There's not a lot of great extension resources out there on use of the bull system. There's a little bit that I've seen, but there's just not a lot of that widely available. So that's kind of the next step. Hopefully here in a few months or so, I'll have some information put together on bulls, but that will be to come. Young females, right? Young females are the ones that are really important, right? These 3 and 4-year-old cows, because we've got a lot of money invested up into them up front, and we want to try to get as many years of service out of those females as we can. And so, focusing on these young cows and really making sure that we're doing a good job of managing these young cows is really critical. Data says, let's have these young females, come in 2s, and I think I would group coming 3-year-old cows in with it as well too. 2 and 3-year-old cows, let's get them at a 6 going into the start of the calving season. And the mature cows, let's put them at a 5. And that's regardless of when you calve. Doesn't matter if you calve in February or if you calve in May or August. That's what the data would tell us on average where we want those females to be. So, okay, well, shall we change gears?
All right, we're going to move on to handling of our vaccines, and we've got some demo products back there. I'm going to start us off. How many of you guys know what the VCPR stands for before you look up it there? I know Charlene does, because she does lessons on it. It's something that I learned through my kids, but it's the veterinary client-patient relationship. So Dr. Warner's our vet. He's our veterinary part of that. I have cattle. I'm the client. The cattle are the patient. It's what we're talking about. So it's going to assume that you have the vet has a familiar working relationship with you, your operation, comes out, does some visits on a yearly basis, assumes the responsibility of making medical judgments on the care and treatment of the animals. And then, like I said, had recent timely medical appropriate visits to the premise, preg checking or times like that where you can have the vet out so they know what you have going on your operation. They have some eyes on your cattle. And as always, the owner agrees to follow the instructions. So if you're at the vet shop and he gives you some medicine, he tells you how to use it, you go and use it the way you're told. And then hopefully your vet is always available for follow-up. I know we're running short on vets sometimes. I went the wrong direction, wrong button. So quality control of the animal health products. I was supposed to look at all this today and I got really busy in those meetings. So proper storage. So it's 35 to 45. How many of you guys know what temperature their refrigerator is at home? Probably don't. You might check, because you don't always have them at this temp. And if you look, there's some stuff that shows, I did look at some stuff earlier in the week, that a lot of bad temperatures in your refrigerators. So make sure you're storing them at the right temp. Check your label. Some need to be in the fridge. Some just need to be kept from being frozen. So if they're delivered to you cold, they probably need to be stored cold. And you go into your pasture, if they need to be kept cold, try to do that when you're going to go use them. So try to have some ice packs, but also don't allow the direct contact.
And guys, I'm going to jump in there, Alex.
Yep.
On your refrigerators, anybody have a refrigerator out in their shop or out in their barn? Yeah. Ours freezes every winter. Terrible place to keep vaccines in. So get your refrigerator thermometer. Keep it in there. Check your refrigerator, because you lose take your medications, your antibiotics, your vaccinations, they go out of those temperature ranges. They lose effectiveness. And so you're completely defeating the purpose of what they're intended for if they're not kept in those temperature range. So cheap, easy thermometer for your refrigerator, fantastic way to keep track of that.
And on the same part of freezing, if they're outside in your barn, they might get too hot in the summer and during the day. You might think they're nice and cool in the morning or nice and cool at night, but they might hit a temp that they're not safe to be at during the day. So yeah, good point on that. Then the storing under the proper conditions, when purchased, prior to use, and chute side. We have some different homemade examples. You can find them online to buy as well. We got everything from forgot one, so you're going to turn your vaccination delivery cooler into your syringe cooler.
Poor man's way, but honest to God, guys, it works. The health department, your local health department, Butler County is amazing. They get 4 to 5 boxes a month in. So if you don't want to spend the money, can't afford to buy one of the high-tech ones, or you haven't built one yet, the biggest challenge is keeping the lid on it on a windy day. So always have some good way to keep that strapped down. But you can put ice packs in the bottom of it. Make sure you put a barrier between the ice pack and your syringe so it's not directly on the ice. Okay. But an option too. And all these ice packs, if anybody needs ice packs, the health department throw them away, because they get so many ice packs. So if you ever need some, and if you need any today, feel free to take some.
Then the smaller one.
Yep.
That's the one I built. I think I probably have $20 and maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes in time, and then some foam dry time in there. The tubes are just set into some foam. You can set a ice pack in there. And then the bigger one, actually, my brother made. And he intended to have drugs in it and all that. I prefer the smaller one, or what Charlene's got in the foam, because you're in and out of a drug cooler that should be kept cold. You're losing your temperature on a big one like that. But yeah, different ways to do the same thing though. This is going to talk about the research that I was looking at the other day. So a couple different research projects. So looking at the 20 different ranches and 4 feed stores, that's a lot of refrigerator failures, not being in the safe zone. Arkansas had a larger test shows a lot more as well on that subject. Processing and treatment records. How many of you guys write down when you doctor an animal? Okay. It's pretty different ways of doing it, but if you can get your date, the animal or the group, the products, the dose, withdrawal time, especially if there is a withdrawal time, you probably need to have that down. Handling them, protect them from the sunlight, protect them from freezing. We've talked about a few of these. You don't want to mix your different vaccines together, and that goes for syringes. So if you're using a disposable syringe or a pistol grip, once you've drawn something in it, that's that syringe's purpose for the day, and probably modified live. You still don't want to do anything different than that syringe for the rest of that syringe's life. And you only want to mix up what you're going to use in an hour. Does this show the drop-in rate of what it has after an hour of modified live?
Don't believe so.
But it starts losing its effectiveness. And keep those vaccines thoroughly mixed. You don't shake the bottle, you roll them in your hands. Shaking can cause damage. Then you keep your transfer needle. It goes in the liquid first. I'm very guilty of going the wrong direction multiple times. And then you go into the rehydrant. And then, like it says, gently roll it, do not shake. I don't know how many times I watched my grandpa shake a drug. Mark your syringes for different vaccines. My pistol grip syringes, they have different colors on the back. You can put a little chart for the different colors, or you put tape on them, something so that you know what is in what. It gets a little tricky when you're using disposables. I know when you're not wanting to reuse the same needle, disposables seem to be pretty easy, but try to figure out, and that's another nice thing about the cooler. It goes back in the same spot. You put the right drugs back in the right ones. Yeah, use the products from the original containers and never re-enter a bottle with used needles. So if you're getting ready to redraw a pistol grip, make sure you have a fresh, clean needle on it before you draw up. Keep your equipment clean. I think it's pretty self-explanatory there. Yeah, don't use any disinfectant with a modified live, or you no longer have a modified live. Also can cause damage to the killed vaccines. We're going to get into syringe care. Probably the last thing anybody thinks about after they get done working cattle. Probably throw them in the sink and walk away. So you want to wash the outside with hot water and a brush. Take apart the barrel. You don't want to use soap on the inside, just good hot water. Inspect your rings while you're doing it. If you got cracks or anything, make sure you're replacing those. Lubricating with silicone or mineral oil, Vaseline. Yeah, fill a small container with hot water. Use distilled water if you got the hard water, like a lot of us probably do. So you draw up and squirt the water out. Do that. Make your arm tired. Then put the clean syringe in a Ziploc bag and seal it after it's dried really well. So that's something I don't do. I don't keep my syringes in the Ziploc bag. So change needles immediately if it bends. You can't even see it sometimes. So if you get dirt or feces or anything else chemical on it, you need to change it. If you can see the damage on the end or the burr, and then if you are reusing 10, 15 cows, that's a lot of cows for a needle to go in. I have Hereford cattle. 10 cows is a lot of hide for a needle to go through on Hereford hides. Between cattle, change it to limit the blood-borne infections like leukosis and anaplasmosis. Oh, we're already on you.
Isn't it? Yes.
We were already there.
I'll bring it up. All right, perfect. Thanks, Alex. Who loves giving shots? Who's scared to give shots? Nobody? I'm scared to give shots. Nobody? Yeah, it's okay, be honest. Who's ever had a shot go bad? Wrong location? Anybody ever kill one from it? I'll have to raise my hand on that one, except for I was not the shot giver. Okay. So we're going to talk about injection site management because it's critical from the BQA, beef quality assurance standpoint, to the safety of yourself and the animals involved. Okay. So injection site, where's our least high quality cut of meat at? Yep, up in there, right? So should we be injecting them in our rear quarters? Probably not. Okay. So let's talk about it. Who's heard of the triangle? Yeah. So that's going to be this area. Let's see if I can figure out the pointer up here. Okay. In front of the point of the shoulders. Okay. Above the vertebra and below the nuchal ligament. Okay. And you can feel that on the cattle if you ever put your hands up there and go to feel that. Okay. We need a model for that. Don't you think?
You probably find
I bet we could find one, right? Proper injection site. Okay. So we always want to be up in this triangle region. Okay. So right up in here is a beautiful spot to give injections. If you're going to be doing down in the dewlap area, okay, you're going to be right in here at the dewlap. One hand technique, okay? Has everybody got really strong grip in here? Some syringes actually do like grip easier, squeeze easier than others. And I'll be honest, I found that with my father, and if he listens to this and hears me say my aging father, I might get in trouble, but you lose some of that grip strength. So make sure and find syringes that work for you and your hands or whoever's given those. But with the one hand technique, okay, you go in at that angle and you can even tint your skin forward, okay, if you're doing your sub-Q. So we're going to talk about sub-Q versus IM and what that looks like. But that's one way to do that. Okay, just another one, 45-degree angle in. Does everybody always use a shoot when they're giving shots? Nope, might be out in the pasture, right? Rope and tied. Anybody ever had to squeeze one behind a trailer gate? That's probably not always the safest and best way to do it, but it happens, okay? All right, so dewlap injections. Who's ever given one of those? I can honestly say that's not one that we've ever done before, but we're going to talk about different needle sizes as well. Okay, here's our triangle region, much higher than down here in our dewlap where you can give sub-Q injections. So sub-Q right underneath the skin. Okay, and if you're using the down in the dewlap, 5/8 inch needle. Okay, pretty short.
Charlene?
Yes.
Count the armpit too, like that dewlap, because I've never saw that before. I mean.
Jason, you want
like
to touch
if
on
you're
that?
Dragging calves,
Uh-huh.
you know, and you got a leg pulled up, is that a good spot? Because I see a lot of shots.
Yeah, that's a good question, but we're so much farther back there at that point on the.
I see a lot of shots go in there.
Yep,
Yeah,
yep, and I have too, and
it's easy.
when you're sitting on a calf that way, it's an easy spot to get to.
Yeah.
It's not a good spot to put it.
If you're only sub-Q on that, would it be that much of a difference? If you're not getting into muscle?
That's why, what's the difference between there and in front of the leg at the dewlap?
Well, biggest problem is we're still that much closer to, the chuck, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Right in your shoulder.
we want to try, if there is, any sort of lesion that could happen, we want to try to keep it concentrated under that area where it's going to be, much lower value part that we're going to be breaking out. So,
Don't look. So definitely not recommended. But yes, common practice, but should probably not be as common as it is. Good question. All right, sub-Q versus IM. Okay, so right underneath the skin, I think of if you take a banana, and I was going to bring a banana tonight and I didn't. Okay, if you pull that skin back, so right underneath that skin and before you hit the meat part is what your sub-Q injection is. Okay, if you get into the meat of the banana, that's like the IM or the muscle tissue. So right underneath the skin for your sub-Q, farther deep into hit your muscle. So let's talk about appropriate needle size. Okay, I'm going to send these presentations out to you guys so you have them as well as a good reference guide for you to go back on, okay? We look at our cattle weights, okay? Sub-Q versus IV versus IM. How do we know which route we're supposed to give? Yep, read your labels. Does everybody read their labels? Yes. Okay, I hope you do. That's going to tell us how we should be administering those vaccinations. Based on the size of the animal is going to determine the gauge, okay? How big the syringe or how big the needle is, okay? 16 gauge is bigger than 20 gauge, okay? And then again, is your product thin, more water consistency, or is it a thicker, heavier product? Okay, those heavy products do not go through a 20 gauge needle. Okay, you've got to go up with your needle size. Okay, so 16 to 18 gauge, 1/2 to 3/4 inch for sub-Q shots is a good rule of thumb, and 1 to 1.5 inches if you're going IM. Okay, I always like to do the pullback method too when I'm giving a shot. If I've got a syringe that I can do that with to make sure I've not hit a vein and to make sure I'm not drawing any blood into it so we don't hit a wrong spot. Injection spacing. Does everybody measure their shots? How far apart they are? Okay. Should we stack them on top of each other or should we go side by side? Side by side. Why? Birthday man? Yeah. Gravity, yeah, because guess what? It's going to leach down to the other, okay? So always go side by side. 4 fingers is a good rule of thumb, about 4 inches, okay? If you have smaller hands, you might need to go a little bit more. If you have big hands, maybe you can go just a little bit less. But this is a good general rule of thumb as to how far apart you should give injections, okay, in that neck region. Side by side, we talked about that, okay? Injection volume. Read the product label. Cody, you hit it. No more than 10 ml or milliliters or cc's per site, okay? Read your bottle as to how much you're supposed to give. If it's something that's going to require more than that, it's going to take 2 injection sites, okay? So don't go, oh, 12 cc's, I can go ahead and just give it there. Break it into 2 doses. Spread it evenly, okay? Implants. Who in here has implanted before? Okay, a few of you guys. All right, in the middle of the year, okay, is where you want to go. You want to avoid other tag holes. You want to avoid old injection sites. All right, you don't want to hit this cartilage ring, okay? You want to keep it in the middle of the ear. If you have to, you can go up a little higher, but the preference is in the middle, in between the ribs. And when you actually have a hold of the ear and look at it, it's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, it makes sense when you actually see that, okay? If the tip of the ear is missing, then you can go to the outer half of the remaining ear. But ideally, this is going to be your preferred spot. And if you're tagging at the same time, don't punch your tag through your implant. Okay, so go a little higher, a little lower. And here's just a picture of them implanting right there in the middle part of the ear. One of the things that we always do is fill right after we pull the implant gun out to make sure that implant is in there and that you've actually accomplished the job that you were going for. Sanitation. So I just started to ask Jason about this. I listened to a presentation by Dr. Oles, Kansas Vet Med, recently, and she was talking about the Asian longhorn tick and the importance of disinfecting between animals. So I have no doubt this coming spring, there's probably going to be a lot more information being pushed out from that standpoint. But disinfecting implant guns, changing needles between animals to help limit some of that spread. I'm no expert. I just found that very interesting as I listened to a presentation a couple weeks ago with her on that. So be watching for more information. But cleaning those implant needles, okay, in between each animal, okay. Chlorhexidine is a great solution to be able to do that. Soak it in a sponge, dilute it down, follow the instructions on the label, okay? And you can just wipe your needle and clean that off in between each animal, okay? If there is any blood-borne issues with one animal that the other does not have or been exposed to, you can help limit that spread, okay? And take the time to do the job right. Okay? We're not on a mad rush. We're not in a mad hurry to get it done. The rain's coming in, the snow blizzard's getting ready to hit as you're working your fall calves, whatever that's like. But take time, slow down, and make sure you do it right. Okay? Saves injury and damage to you and or the animal in the process.